Senator Jim Oberweis, good to see you again on the Illinois Channel. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Terry. Pleasure to be with you.
You had a press conference earlier this week as we taped this, and we wanted to give you a little more time to expand upon some of the thoughts. And basically talking about the economy in Illinois and what can be do to turn the economy of Illinois around and fix some of the problems that we all face. Governor Rauner has said, and I think a lot of people would agree with him, that you can raise a lot more revenue in the state of Illinois, not by raising taxes, but by increasing the economy.
Absolutely, yes.
And really that is where the growth, even with the existing tax levels that we have, if the national economy were to grow, as we hope it will this year, at north of 3%, as these tax cuts that were just passed at the end of last year take into effect, even that would bring in, one would expect, with further economic activity in Illinois, more revenue to the state. But a lot of people know you, interestingly, as the dairy, Jim Oberweis, and in fact, some of the fellows that I've talked to, that when I said we're going to interview you, said, yeah, I get his milk and it's great, But you actually started off, for the viewers, not more in the financial world, not in the dairy world, and so we wanted to tap your expertise on that.
I grew up in the dairy business. It was a business started by my grandfather, and I did, when I was in high school and college, I worked there and did most every job there was. But I had a brother 8 years older than I who went into that business, and I decided, I don't want to be little brother Jim for the rest of my life, so I'm going to go do something else. I actually intended to be a lawyer, but was offered a job in the securities business as a stockbroker in 1970, and I decided I like the stock market, I like the challenge, I like the competition, I'm going to give it a try. And let me tell you, I loved it from day one. I mean, we just had a great time. And I started, first of all, an investment advisory letter, which did very well, and we had a model portfolio with a lot of stocks in it, about 50 stocks, and people said, gee, I like your ideas, but I don't want to buy 50 stocks. Can you do something to make it easier? So we ended up starting a mutual fund, and that was the beginning of Oberweis Asset Management, which I built up to about $1 billion under management, which I thought was great.
That's a lot.
And I turned that over to my son when I got elected to the Illinois Senate, or actually a little bit before that. And he's built it up to $4 billion. So
wow.
He's done a better job than I did. He's done a terrific job, and that's made life much easier for me. Unfortunately, about 25 years ago, my brother had a stroke and was unable to continue in the dairy business. So I ended up buying the business at that time. It was a very small business, about $5 million in sales. And we've actually grown that now to about starting to approach $100 million in sales. And my other son, Joe, is running that business today. So I'm free to spend my time in Springfield or Washington, and spend primarily Springfield. But I have to say, it was fun, it was exciting the first couple of years. I was learning things, but lately it's just become incredibly frustrating. My intention when I first ran, we knew we had serious financial problems, particularly with the unfunded pension liabilities. And I thought, gee, with my experience in the financial business, I understand pensions, I understand liabilities, I understand investments. Maybe that background experience could be of some help. Unfortunately, what I found after I was elected and got here was they don't really want somebody who understands it. They just want people who vote the way they suggest, do what they want, not question things. And that's what's gotten us into the mess that we're in, quite frankly. Illinois has just incredible advantages. I mean, we've got some of the best agricultural land in the entire world. We are, I believe, the #1 producer of soybeans and the #2 producer of corn in the world. We've got some great universities, University of Illinois, Northwestern, University of Chicago, and a great secondary college system and community college system as well. We're a transportation hub with where we're located, great interstates crossing the state. One of the 2 or 3 busiest airports in the world in O'Hare. A great visitor center in the city of Chicago. A lot of people coming to...
Yeah, millions coming through conventions.
Correct.
Every week. When you want to have a convention that's going to have 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 people attending, there's not a lot of cities that can handle that, to have enough hotel rooms and all.
So we've got all these advantages over other states, and yet the politicians in Springfield keep screwing things up. For years, have created these, giveaways on pensions and other types of things that are essentially bankrupting the state or making the future very difficult. The only way we really can overcome that is if we do get the economy growing more rapidly and start attracting more businesses and jobs and people to the state of Illinois. Unfortunately, we're going the wrong direction. We now have the one of the two highest property taxes. I believe New Jersey is number one, Illinois number two in terms of the highest taxes per assessed valuation. We now have one of the higher income taxes. In total, I believe our taxes are probably higher than any other state per person. And that's tragic. I mean, that's what costs us jobs. On top of that, we have a very business-unfriendly environment. It's almost hostile to business. Things like very high workers' comp rates. The workers' comp rates in Indiana are maybe half of what they are in Illinois. And some of the legislation that's introduced is just absolutely incredibly insane. When I was elected, I thought, maybe Democrats just have a different agenda and different values than we do, and we've got to fight to get the right business opportunities so we attract more businesses. What I've found is some of my Democrat colleagues have become good friends. They're good people. They're well-intentioned. They believe they were elected to come to Springfield to pass more legislation or create more programs to help people in their community. That's great. The problem is so many of them don't understand economics. They don't understand business. They don't create a list, okay, here are 10 things we'd like to do. This year we can only fund 3 of them. Which are the 3 most important? That's not the way it works in Springfield. In Springfield, it's here are 10 things, let's pass them all. How are you going to pay for them? We'll worry about that later. These are good things. This will help this person. This will help this person. We got it. We can, you've got all the buzzwords. It'll help females. It'll help children. It'll help elderly. It'll help seniors. It'll help military veterans. And it's very hard to speak against those because who is hurt by those are taxpayers, which are a very large group, but not a politically connected group, not a group that's really paying attention to what's going on. So that piece of legislation, one after another, spends money to try to help this small group without realizing what it's doing to the broader picture and the future of the state of Illinois. And truthfully, I don't know what the answer is going to be. I don't know how we get out of this mess that we're in unless we can suddenly change our ways and become more business friendly, attract more jobs, more people, and grow the economy more rapidly. Unfortunately, we're doing the opposite. Illinois has lost population.
When you said, like the example, like you said, 3 things, we might want to do 10. If we were going to turn the economy around and you had the power to do so, we got income tax, we've got property taxes, we've got workers' comp, you mentioned, that or other things. What would you do if you were handed the magic baton and said, make it Illinois a better state? What would you change for business so we could have the growth?
I truly think our governor has the right ideas and proposed the right things, but obviously Mr. Madigan has been fiercely opposed to those things. And what are those right things? Getting workers' comp costs under control would certainly help businesses. Gradually reversing the income tax increase, the 32% income tax increase that we passed last year, gradually rolling that back over time to bring taxes under control. Or in the alternative, a property tax freeze or a gradual property tax rollback. One of the problems is almost all of our school funding is coming from property taxes, and they're driving those rates up to astronomical levels. It is possible that with the higher state income tax we have, the state could provide a little more funding for the schools, and we could begin to roll back some of those property taxes. Plus, we've got to operate our schools more efficiently. The costs of operating the system have grown not because we've grown dramatically the number of teachers or teacher salaries so much as that we've grown administrative costs and pension costs. The big problem, or one of the problems, is that those pension costs are not paid by the school district who create those liabilities. They're paid by the state of Illinois. So there's been no incentive for them to control those. In fact, the incentive has been for the school district to pay moderate salaries until late in the teacher's career, and then boost the salary in the last 1 or 2 or 3 years, because pension costs are based on ending salary, and the school district doesn't have to pay it. The taxpayers of the state of Illinois
There's
do.
also the case that a lot of schools, the teachers have negotiated, their union have negotiated to where the district will pay the teacher's contribution
Even that,
as well.
yes, even that.
So then the local taxpayers are paying for both sides of the contribution, the teacher's
Correct.
portion as well as what the school board has to put in.
Correct. So the kinds of reforms that the governor's proposed are beginning to push that cost back on the school district and increase state funding to the school district so that it doesn't really cost them more money, but it makes them more responsible and gives them an incentive to get
What
those
would
costs
that-
under control.
I would argue, and I came from St. Louis, the amount of money that my house is about $300,000 average valuation here. The amount of tax I pay, property tax, if I had
About
it in St.
$8,000.
About $8,000. Exactly. If I was paying $8,000 in St. Louis, my house would be a $700,000 or $800,000 home. I mean, to show you
Sure.
the difference.
Yes.
So I would argue that the property tax is killing the Illinois economy.
Exactly.
And then let's apply it to business. The businessman too is doing the same thing. right?
Exactly.
The property taxes.
And it's even accelerated in Chicago because they, to a degree, undertax residential property and overtax commercial property. At Oberweis Dairy, we're looking for where to locate our stores. Those incredible costs in Chicago are one of the things that keep us out of Chicago. I have historically been proposing Illinois locations for our ice cream, and we now have a second concept called That Burger Joint for our stores in Illinois, because I live in Illinois and I've lived in the same house for 40 years. My family has been in the Fox Valley area, Aurora
You've seen
area.
your property taxes go up for 40 years.
It's horrendous. Our family has been in the Fox Valley area, the Aurora area, for approximately 150 years. I don't want to leave, but these costs are driving us away. And each one of the new stores that we're opening provides about 60 jobs. And I've been arguing to open them in Illinois. And my son is saying, "Hey, Dad, you want me to run this company, and you want me to make a profit, but look at how much better a store can do if I open it in Indianapolis instead of in Illinois. If I open it in St. Louis
Has he
instead of
shown you
Illinois."
those numbers? I mean, literally?
Well, we've opened some stores.
And how much better, and this is something I want to, not trying to propagandize anyone, but as far as a lot of people, I've run a business for 12 years before I got back into journalism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something that I wish everyone was educated on what it takes to run a small business. It can be brutal.
That's right. And
I
margins.
was once working at 3 a.m. and thinking to myself, I got to come in early tomorrow. So I ended up just sleeping on the couch to save myself the drive time.
Look, the profit margins in the investment management business, when you go from $1 billion to $4 billion under management in our mutual funds, fabulous. And 1 or 2% isn't going to kill us. However, in the food business, margins are very, very tiny. We hope at the end of the year that we've got 2 or 3 cents at the end of the year out of $1 of sales, if we're lucky. Small differences make it tough.
I'll make up a number, $100 million in sales.
Right.
They must think, wow, you're rolling in dough.
Not
but
true.
The fact of the matter is 99% of that's going to pay for all the other costs of doing
Right.
business, the food, the overhead,
right.
the taxation.
Exactly.
And this is where when people say, well, we're going to pass something where it's going to be only X additional costs on your business,
Right.
that might mean, even
The
if
difference
you're
between
Walmart,
profitability and loss.
yeah, as I say, you take a Walmart and people think, well, they got more money than God. But if each store is operating on a margin of 2% and you increase their cost by 3%, all of a sudden all of those stores have a negative cash flow.
Terry, I want to go back to the question you asked about what can be done and the reforms that the governor's proposed.
Right.
I talked a little bit about the importance.
I want you to say that, but I wanted to address too. The property taxes to me are killing us.
Yes.
Now,
That's one of the reforms. He's proposed a
Florida
freeze.
doesn't have an income and Texas doesn't have an income tax, but our income tax is not really that high relative to many other states. The surrounding states have more. In my estimation, our income tax is not killing us, but that property tax is.
Yes.
So as you give your answer, I'm looking at what can we do to get the property tax down, because I don't know why any business would move to Illinois given the property taxes.
Well, one of those proposals that he's made is a property tax freeze. Let me point out.
Is there something we can do to get it down, though? So my $8,000 can go to $7,000, or
there is, and one of those things is to provide a little more funding for school districts, which we're in the process of doing. And
a general tax, and take some of the money off the local property taxes?
Correct. That's right. Exactly. And that's one of the ways the governor's proposed. And he's proposed a property tax freeze, but you have to have a freeze before you can start to bring it down. Or even just if you freeze it for a long period of time, inflation will tend to make that increasingly a lower amount. So that's certainly a step in the right direction. But it's only a step. And you mentioned Florida, which has no state income tax. I can tell you their property taxes relative to valuation are, again, about half of what the property taxes are in Illinois. And you talked about surrounding states having comparable income tax rates to our higher rates we have now. That's true, but guess what? Democrats aren't satisfied with that. They're talking about wanting a so-called progressive income tax where the higher tax rates might go to 8 or 10%, arguing that
they
the
want
rich,
to be like the federal, where
yes,
we tax those with
yes,
more money
yes,
at a higher rate.
Correct.
Whereas we have a flat tax
right.
rate.
And the only problem with that is, guess what? Those who are earning more money will accelerate their exodus from the state of Illinois. So from that standpoint, I think it's absolutely the worst thing that we could possibly do. But my Democrat colleagues don't seem to understand that or agree with that.
There was a person, I believe in, I forget the name of it, but he was a big financier in New Jersey. And he left the state because of the tax rate law.
Sure.
And he was making so much money that just that one person leaving actually put a big dent in the income to the state of New Jersey.
Yeah, it's a serious thing. But let's go back to some of those other reforms that you asked a question about. Governor's proposed term limits. I think that would be incredibly good for the state of Illinois. If you have people who are term limited, they're much more likely to vote in ways that they think are good for the future of the state of Illinois, instead of voting in the ways that are good for their own reelection. When
but
people are
that's
career,
not going to happen.
I disagree with you. I think it is going to happen. It's happened in Florida. It's happened in many other states. It is critical. It's a critical part of turning the state around. Now, how will it happen? No, legislators aren't going to vote term limits.
Speaker Madigan as Speaker?
It can. They're not going to vote to limit themselves, but what hopefully the legislature will do is to vote term limits on those who are not in the Senate now, but who are newly elected beginning in, pick a number, 2020, 2022, or something of that nature.
I think your argument is they would quit voting for things that just, as you say, would help them get elected, and
yes.
They might make, your argument would be, more rational decision making because they know they're going to have to go back to the private sector.
Correct. Most people, as I said, want to do the right thing. They want to do good things, but they're pulled by, okay, how is that going to affect my reelection campaign? So that would solve it. And then you hear the argument, well, they can't learn the job that fast. Well, come on, if you're electing smart people, they can figure it out in a year or two. It doesn't take 8 or 10 or 15 years to figure it out. For heaven's sakes, serving as president of the United States is a lot more complex than serving in the Illinois legislature. And somehow the president of the United States serves for a maximum of 8 years. And I think that's been a good rule. That's been good for our country. Other reforms we've talked about are redistricting reform, to take the politics out of it. Let an independent commission or a computer program draw districts that are more concise, more compact, that are keeping neighborhoods together instead of gerrymandering it all over to try to get the biggest political advantage. In Illinois, the political advantage has gone certainly to Democrats because they've drawn the map, but in other states like Texas, it's gone more for Republicans because they've drawn the map. And believe me, I'm sure the Republicans are just as aggressive at trying to gerrymander, draw their districts in their favor as Democrats are. So we've got to take that away from the politicians and, again, do the right thing there.
Let's go back to economics for a moment, just dollars and cents, literally. So knowing what you know, your whole career relative to the financial markets and Oberweis mutual funds was about working with clients to
Sure.
allow them over time to build wealth. And you would argue, sure, I would argue, I've invested for 40 years. I tell people, you want to have money, your wealth growing, aside from your own personal labor.
Right.
And when you buy a stock in Anheuser-Busch or Boeing or something else, those people work when you're sleeping. They continue to build things, which is really why this works over time. Wealth is created over decades. So, but knowing what we, why aren't we doing having people coming in with a 401k plan, number one, instead of it just doesn't make sense. And again, for the viewer's sake, I'll say, before I knew I was coming to Illinois, I wrote my master's thesis back in 1993 on the coming collapse of publicly funded pensions, because none of them are funded based upon market returns. If I might get, what would you say, 8% a year on average?
Stocks have returned 8% a year on average, but most retirement plans or pension plans invest, ballpark figures, half of their funds in the stock market and the other half in fixed income, in bonds, which have yielded 4, 5, 6%. So the average then becomes maybe 6 or 7%, not 8%.
So if I wanted to have a $60,000 a year income, I would have to have $1 million invested to generate
something
approximately.
Like that. Yeah, right.
I mean, we're cutting some corners to make math simple here. Something like that. The problem is some people are getting $75,000 or $80,000 or $100,000, and you look at how much did they put into their pensions, and they put maybe their contribution as well as the state or municipal government. Maybe they only contributed $500,000. So their pension is based upon...
Or maybe much less than that in many cases.
Yeah, I mean, it might be, in other words, they're getting a return of 20% or so. There's a
look, another...
So what happens for the... I'll finish this thought so the viewer can understand, because I think it's easy to get lost. There's one former state official, I'm told the contributions were $400,000 over the course of his career, which would be 8%, a $32,000 pension if it were properly funded. His pension's $136,000 a year, which means where does that $100,000 come that isn't being generated? It comes out of the financial cookie jar, which is what money we should be using to operate the state, right? Our budget.
Part of the problem with the pension underfunded liability is that when some of these plans started 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, the lifetime, the longevity was much less than it is today. Every time the longevity goes up, your unfunded liability goes up, because when you were asking for contributions in the 70s and 80s and 90s from people, you were basing those contribution levels on an assumption that people would be, I'll just make up numbers, retire at 65 and live another 10 years. Now they're retiring at sometimes 60 and living till 85 or 90 instead, which increases those liabilities very significantly. So that's a real problem. And then on top of that, we had what was nicely called pension holidays in Illinois. And so your viewers can understand what that is. All that was a situation where Illinois legislature wanted to spend more money than their tax revenue would allow if they made their legitimate pension contributions. So instead of making their legitimate pension contributions, they went ahead and spent the money, but didn't make some of those pension contributions. So effectively, they were financing some of that deficit spending for operating purposes out of the pension contribution that they didn't make. That's how we began to get such large unfunded pension liabilities. Now, other companies, mention companies like American Airlines or United Airlines, or big quality blue chip stocks like U.S. Steel and Bethlehem Steel in years past, got into some similar problems, not by not making the required pension payments, because if they didn't make their pension payments, the CEO of the company would go to jail.
Right.
They made the pension payments specified by law, but as the returns failed to meet their expected return level, and lifetime longevity went up, their funds became so underfunded that when they had to make increased pension payments to cover that unfunded liability, they couldn't do it. They ended up going bankrupt. And then the pensioners, the receivers of those pensions, had their pensions cut by 30 or 40%.
So, what's killing us are in the state of Illinois, and it's not just the state, it's the city of Chicago, it's all these municipal governments.
Yes.
City of Springfield struggles, I think every municipality struggles. One
Yes.
mayor said to me, when I hire a police officer, it's not a $70,000 a year commitment for the city, it's a $2 million commitment, lifetime, because that's about what they're going to have to pay on pensions over the course of that career. Given where we are, and frankly, I would say, I mean, we throw out the pensions are underfunded by $200 billion. I would argue people don't even know what the real number is, and it's going to vary on so many factors.
Yeah, it depends on what assumptions you make.
Sure. And when you have a number that big, it can be off widely, but it's a big number. Mm-hmm. About 3 or 4 years ago, the finance director for the city of Chicago said at the city club, we have enough money to pay the pensions of those who are currently retired, but not the pensions of those who are currently working on the fire and police.
Sure.
So it's not fair to those who are working thinking they're going to get a pension if they work and then when they want it, the cupboard is bare.
Right.
So what do we do? Again, you're probably one of the more astute people financially in the legislature.
Go right back to one of the reforms.
What do we do to get ourselves out of this hole?
One of the reforms that the governor proposed was converting everybody to a defined contribution plan instead of a defined benefit plan, a 401k type plan. That's right.
Why hasn't he done that?
Because the Democrats won't allow it. Mike Madigan won't allow it.
On the new hires?
Well, they haven't allowed it on anything yet. We did get past an option so that somebody can now come in and select or choose a 401k type plan as a new hire. But look, to get control of our unfunded liabilities, we have to have some type of change. And I believe if we could end the 3% compound COLA that we have today, that no private industry has. You know, very few companies in the private industry have any defined contribution, defined benefit plans at all.
Right.
But I don't know of anybody that has a defined benefit plan with a 3% compound COLA on top of that.
What about Senator Cullerton's approach? He's been trying to say, if you guys give up this, we'll match your, one of the legislature has their hands tied by the state constitution.
They probably need a change.
Can't diminish
We
pensions.
probably need a constitutional change in that regard.
So that we can do something.
Right, and I think, as I started to say, just changing that COLA formula could save the system. If we don't, what is the answer? I don't know. States cannot declare bankruptcy. However, perhaps the state pension system can. I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anybody knows the answer to that. It's going to end up being tested in court, very possibly.
Might it not also be possible? I mean, and we see almost like what happened just recently with the state. They owe bills, but they weren't paying them.
Correct.
So that we might say, oh, we haven't diminished your pension, and when we have the money, we'll send you a check.
I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but that would, well, it's probably never going to get to that, and I'll tell you why. Because the trustees of the pension plan have a responsibility not just to the current recipients, but to future recipients as well. So if they paid out all of the existing assets in the plan and had nothing left, they'd probably be subject to lawsuits from the future retirees who then have no money there to pay it.
Have you looked at the levels of funding? Ideally, you're at least 90% funded for your pensions. Do you know what those levels are of the funding model?
Sure, they're approximately 40%.
Yeah, I think TRS, which is the teacher's retirement, is about 40.
Right.
The legislature
Is the worst.
Is about 15% or
Right.
so.
Right.
So there's just, we're not even close to having the money in there.
That's right. And by the way, it's not just pension. There's also medical benefits. Let me tell you, a week ago, I learned for the first time that I, as a state legislator, if I serve for 8 years, I'm entitled to lifetime fully paid medical benefits. That's insane. That's crazy. Now, admittedly, it's a relatively small group compared to the teachers' retirement system or the state workers' retirement systems, but still, It's nuts. And I will tell you, a state legislature, again, can earn a fairly hefty pension in 8 years or 10 years of service. I have declined that pension because I felt it was wrong. I felt that...
what kind of a pension would a lawmaker get? I mean, just in approximate dollars.
It depends on how many years,
right.
But certainly I'm sure there are some that started with a pension of 60 or 70,000 that are now well over 100,000. But we have school administrators. I forget what the number is. There are hundreds of Illinois retirees receiving a pension in excess of $100,000 a year. Some as high as $300,000 and $400,000 a year in pension benefits. I mean, this is just crazy. One suggested reform that I think makes a lot of sense is cap pension payments at some reasonable number. I don't know whether that's $75,000 or $100,000, but something in that area as the maximum pension you can receive. That would help enormously as well.
If we had a 401k, aside from what it would do for the taxpayers,
would solve the problem.
Let's talk about what it would do. People go, 401k, well, I'm going to get, that's a horrible deal. It would actually, if you made your contributions, which if you're working for the state, they would make the contributions regularly, you could have a fairly good retirement fund. And the other thing I would point out to those who have pensions, if you worked, pick a number, 30 years for the state, and you die of a heart attack a week after you retire,
you get to keep your 401k plan if you have that.
But you don't keep your pension. Your pension ends, right?
Right.
But your 401k plan, if you had $500,000 in there, your family would get the $500,000.
Right. Exactly.
So to that end, because people never think about it, I think that the 401k plan is a better deal in certainly that aspect than the pension.
Certainly in that aspect, there's no question about it. The question is, how much are you going to pay into it? If we pay into, typically they do it with some type of a match where the employee puts in some number, let's say 8, 9, 10% of their earnings, and then the employer matches that, maybe 50 cents per dollar they put in or something of that nature. Right. If you're getting 12% of your salary put away every year for 30 years, that would be an incredibly lucrative plan, assuming you have a diversified investment portfolio and we still have an 8 or 9% stock market return.
And people will say, well, in fact, in a debate, Dick Durbin said, aren't you glad George Bush, as president, kind of suggested something along those lines. Senator Durbin said, aren't you glad we didn't do what George Bush wanted when we had the crash of 10 years ago in 2008?
Except it's all come back now in spades. And
isn't it also true, if the market goes down, it actually benefits the person who's still working?
Yes.
Because then you're buying not
more
one
assets
share of Boeing,
for a lower. Yes.
You're buying 2 shares
Right.
of Boeing because,
Right.
as I tell people, when do you want to buy a Cadillac? When they're 80,000 or when they're 20,000? You're actually better off when the market declines because you can build wealth faster.
Right. The person who gets hurt by the stock market decline is the person who is retired and making withdrawals from their system, which is why many financial advisors suggest when you retire or when you're getting close to retirement, maybe convert more of your portfolio to something safe, fixed income, CDs, bonds, or something of that nature that aren't going to change in value so much.
The other thing, not to make us feel more depressed than we might already be, but Chicago, now we'd have to pass a bill, Chicago could and might be forced into declaring bankruptcy.
Detroit did.
Detroit did. And I think what I'm trying to do, and given your knowledge of finance, to let people know out there that if we don't make some serious changes, and time is running out, because we have the baby boomers retiring in mass numbers, and so our costs are going to be ramping up, we won't be able to keep this juggling act going. The plates are going to start falling onto the floor. You feel like the old guy that we used to watch on Ed Sullivan, and he would see how many plates can he keep spinning.
Sure.
That's about how we are.
Yeah.
But they're wobbling, and all of a sudden this could all come crashing down. We're already operating just above junk bond status. It wouldn't take much to drive the state into junk bond status, and at that point, when you try to do a bond issue or anything, the pension funds out there who buy paper from government, the bond, they're not going to be able touch our bonds because we would be in junk.
It's a tough situation. There's no question about it. We have to do the right things to get Illinois moving forward, to get a positive environment so that we're attracting jobs and businesses and people want to stay here and want to come to Illinois. That takes a change in psychology. That's what I'm so frustrated about. That's why I had the press conference to talk about these problems, to try to get people to understand how important it is to take action now. We don't want to get to that point where those plates that you're talking about juggling start to fall off the sticks.
I don't want you to name names, but I'm just saying, when you talk to your fellow lawmakers, and you said they're good people, and it's not to say they're stupid. I mean, I could ask a basic economic question of 100 doctors and lawyers, and probably about 10% would be able to. These people, to me, it's a crime in our society we don't teach not highfalutin economics, but just how the stock market works. I mean, someone in the fourth grade ought to know the difference between a stock and a bond. It's not complicated.
Sure.
Well, when you talk to your fellow lawmakers, and you kind of touched on this, is it that they don't have the basic economic understanding to basically follow your argument, or what kind of a response do you get from them? Or is it the feeling that, well, we can keep pushing the wolf off away from the door for another decade?
Some of both. There's certainly that general feeling because they've been told, for 10 years, oh, we can't afford this, and then they pass it anyhow, and somehow we muddle through. But as we saw with the unpaid bill situation, it gets to be quite a mess and a pretty serious situation. But it's also true that there are some very good people, very well-intentioned people, who just have had no experience in business, no experience in economics. They may have been school teachers who taught, history or English or something like that, no relationship to economics. They may have had some other job, or maybe never. Maybe they've only been in government where they don't understand the realities and the cruel, harsh realities of the real world out there.
I don't want to make this overly political, and we're going to have to wrap up, but Governor Edgar turned, I think he had about, $1 billion. The state was in a bad situation in his first term, and when he left, I think he said there was like $1.5 billion surplus. So, he turned it around, the state around, in about 8 years. But he wasn't out there attacking Mike Madigan the way the governor is kind of demonized. Is it a mistake, do you think, for the governor, the way he's approached the speaker, instead of saying, hey, maybe we should, he's the speaker, and maybe I'd like to have all kinds of changes made, and maybe he believes that Mike Madigan should be out of the speakership, but
I completely disagree with you.
Can we get where we want to go given the political climate?
I absolutely disagree with your hypothesis there. Unfortunately, I believe that a lot of these problems go back to Jim Edgar. He's the guy who began with some of the pension holidays and the unfunded liabilities and financed some of this stuff by not making the pension payments. And he said he did it in a small way, and that was, expanded on by Blagojevich to a huge degree. And
George Ryan had the early retirement, which all of a sudden,
yes,
it closed 1 year like a $60 million budget hole, but it
exactly
really expanded our pension draw because these people were not paying into the pension, but all of a sudden drawing on the pension.
Exactly. So I believe that what our current governor, Ron, has done is exactly the right thing. He's had to stand up and take a very firm position against Mike Madigan. And remember, Mike Madigan is serving the interests of the public sector unions in particular, and the trial lawyers. Those are the two things that are killing taxpayers, but that's where he gets his money. Remember, he is the chairman of the state Democrat Party, so he gets all his money in from those groups. Then he doles it out to the state rep candidates for his races, and guess what? If he's financing their races, they look at him as the guy who's in charge, and they owe their loyalty to him. That's the problem here in the state of Illinois. You don't have people. I made an impassioned plea on the floor of the Senate today to both Republicans and Democrats to vote yes on the bills that they believe are good bills and no on the bills that they believe are bad bills. But that's not what happens. What happens is, okay, this is a Democrat bill, all the Democrats are going to vote for it, and the Republicans aren't. And the Republican bill, the Republicans are going to vote, and they're in a minority, so they aren't going to pass it without some Democrat support. Right. So you tend to get bills that are, anything that has any political consequences are only the ones that are supported and sponsored by the Democrats, namely those that support the trial lawyers and the unions. Yes, there are some where we get together. For instance, my bill to increase the speed limit on the interstates to 70 miles per hour was a bipartisan bill. We did work together on that. It didn't have any particular political sides on that particular issue. And there are some things that do pass in a bipartisan manner. But when you get into issues like workman's comp, when you get into issues like taxes, when you get into issues like term limits, you get very, very strong party votes where the Democrats are going to win. They're going to win every time because they're taking the money from the public sector unions and the trial bar. So they're going to support whatever legislation those groups want.
Last question. You're in not only the legislature, but you're in the business community. You have probably any number of friendships and associations in the business community. You have already said you want to stay in Illinois, but how much do you hear amongst your friends who are business people or work? How
Great
many
question.
of them are looking to leave the state?
I'm particularly in a group called Young Presidents Organization, or at least I was when I was younger. Years ago, the conversation when people would get, to 60, 65 years old, the conversation would be, well, when you retire, are you going to move? Are you going to stay? What are you going to do? And that was the kind of thought. That's not the thought anymore. Now when we have those discussions, it's, when are you leaving Illinois? And that's heartbreaking. Because remember, these are the people with the greatest assets. These are the people who are paying the most taxes. And they're gone once they hit that retirement age. They leave, they go to Florida, they go to Texas, they go to any place that has lower tax rates. And unfortunately, I mentioned that we're losing people net in the state, but it's worse than that because the people who are leaving tend to be the people with greater assets and greater income than the people who are coming into the state. So it's compounding the situation. And that's what I'm trying to get across to my friends on the other side of the aisle in the Illinois Senate. And I just can't seem to get that message across because they don't want to hear the message.
Senator Jim Oberweis, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Terry, for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.